Good evening and welcome to Lightning Talks. I'm Jim Wharton. My pronouns are he and him. I'm the Vice President for Conservation Engagement and Learning here at the Aquarium. Now tonight, we're coming to you live from the Seattle Aquarium on the shores of Puget Sound in the traditional and contemporary territories of the Coast Salish people. No matter where you're joining us from tonight, we hope that you and yours are staying safe and healthy. Now our topic tonight is ocean technology. Now, people love to say that we know more about the surface of the moon or Mars than we do the deep ocean. And there's a reason for that. The ocean can seem every bit as vast and inhospitable as space. It requires technology for exploration. But diving bells and manned submersibles have given way to remotely operated vehicles and cabled observatories. We even have techniques now like environmental DNA that allow us to reach into the recent past. Together, we hope that these technologies, these techniques, and the scientists who deploy them are going to give us better and better forecasts for the future so that we can make important conservation and management decisions today. And as usual, we have 5 great speakers to tell you more. Now, if you've never been a part of a Lightning Talks event before, here's what you can expect. 5 great speakers have 5 minutes each to share one big idea, and not 1 second more. Now they'll get a warning at 1 minute, they'll get another at 30 seconds, and then finally at time. And if they go over, they get this. Now we like to keep things moving tonight, so we won't be stopping to ask questions after every speaker. But at the end of the evening, we're going to bring all of our speakers back for a Q&A session. So please do put your questions and comments into the chat throughout the evening. Now, if you enjoy what you see tonight and you'd like to support the Seattle Aquarium, please do consider a donation. When you donate to the Seattle Aquarium, you're joining us in our mission of inspiring conservation of our marine environment. And if you haven't yet, please do click like and subscribe. Now, we have a great program tonight, and I want to get right to it. So let me introduce our first speaker. Garza is an environmental marine ecologist with the University of Washington. He uses technology and statistics to understand the relationships between species, distributions, and habitat complexity. That's a mouthful. Now, he'll be speaking this evening about how he and his team use aerial drones in this work. So, Corey, are you ready to kick us off?
Great. Thank you very much. So today I'm going to be talking to you about a marine drone program that we run at the University of Washington that we're using in pretty novel ways to try to improve our understanding of the coastal environment. So traditionally, when we've studied the coastal environment, we've used a series of pretty standard tools. A quadrat, which is that plastic square you're seeing at the very top there. You pretty much put it down and count what's inside of that square. Transect surveys, which you're seeing here in that middle photo. former graduate students of mine up in British Columbia, and you put the tape down and you count what's underneath it. It can take a while to do that, so it's not the quickest way to get data. Or scuba. There's a few of my students down there on the bottom, down in Catalina Island in Southern California, getting ready to go underwater and collect data. Now, while these have been our traditional tools that provide a lot of information on the ocean environment, they're very limited in the amount of space you can cover. For example, where those top two photos there, you can really only cover like maybe a 10 square meter area over there. And you also have limited temporal coverage. The divers down there, they can't swim very far. They can only stay underwater for about maybe 45 minutes or so. Whereas up above, those two pictures there, you're limited by the tides. And so we really need new approaches to try to address some of these emerging research questions that are popping up. They're becoming ever more complex. So at Washington, we have our Marine Landscape Ecology Lab that I oversee, which employs a number of different types of aerial drones. Some of them, what you're seeing here, these Mavics here, are pretty standard images, are pretty standard drones here for taking photos. What you're seeing here is the Matrice, which is a heavy payload drone that can carry specialized equipment. What you're seeing here is the Firefly, which is a vertical takeoff and landing drone, which is a fixed-wing drone that takes off like a helicopter, but flies like an airplane, so we can cover really big areas of ground. And what you're seeing at the bottom there is one of our newest drones that we call Rogue One, part of the Rogue Squadron, which is a series of drones with high-resolution cameras that can actually transmit imagery from the field back to a technician who's back in the lab. And so we're using a whole suite of tools here to help us improve our understanding of the ocean environment. Now, in terms of the type of things that we use it for, we use them for lots of different applications. So the top photo there, what you're seeing are the movie. You're seeing one of our drones conducting intertidal monitoring surveys. This used to take us 3 or 4 hours to do with traditional methods. We now do this in about 10 minutes or so. Kelp forest monitoring is another area that we get into. Estuary monitoring, you're seeing a snapshot of an NPR story that was done on our drone program when I was previously in Monterey Bay, talking about how we're using drones to actually track the recovery of a coastal wetland known as Elkhorn Slough that's being restored down in Monterey Bay. And more recently, we've started using drones for marine mammal monitoring. It's a less invasive way than getting right up to marine mammals to monitor, because we can fly about 400 feet above them and count the pinup heads in this picture here without them really ever knowing that we're around. And we produce a lot of interesting research products as part of this. On the left there, you're seeing a rocky intertidal bed here. This kind of center part here is the mussel bed. Now, we used to classify this by hand, which could take hours and hours to do. Now we can put it into computer software using artificial intelligence and machine learning, and the software will automatically classify this picture for us in a matter of minutes. And you can see over here, it's breaking it down to little habitat types. We can also use our photos from the drones to create 3D recreations of some of the habitats that we take a look at. And so this is a tide pool or rocky intertidal habitat from Hopkins Marine Station of Stanford University in Monterey Bay. And so we create these virtual fly-throughs that not only serve researchers, but we can create virtual tours for people who might not have access to this environment. Now, I'm also an educator, and so I'm also interested in how we use these tools to actually help the public and students understand how they can study the environment. You're looking at one of my former students there on the left, Charnel. She's actually talking to a gentleman, his grandchildren out on Catalina Island. They happen to walk by, and she's teaching them about how she's using drones for her thesis. You're looking at a former technician of mine, Patty Ampietro, in the middle there, talking to a local news channel about how we're using drones for kelp forest. And there's Pat again, working with students from Jackson State University, which is a historically Black college and university, about how they can use drones actually as part of their training or to actually enter the workforce within the marine science research endeavor. And so one of the things that we're going to have to come to terms to in closing is that whether we're ready for it or not in the marine science world, automation is coming. And it's one of those tools that we're going to have to learn how to use and incorporate in our ongoing sort of exploration of the ocean environment. So again, thank you for the opportunity to chat tonight, and I'm looking forward to taking your questions later on.
Thank you, Corey. That was incredibly interesting. We were just in Bali recently, a team from the Aquarium that was doing some filming for our new Ocean Pavilion exhibit. And we were using drones for some of that filming. And one of the things that we noticed is that when we put the drones up in the sky, we weren't the only ones there. Have you noticed that you've had to sort of compete for aerial space with recreational drones?
On occasion, actually, the one that's actually more that we run into, it's actually private pilots. Flying low. That tends to actually be one of the more common ones for us for some of the areas that we work in. Often we'll get weekend pilots out when we're doing some of our work flying a little lower than they should be. And so we usually have a spot with us. So it hasn't been so much the drones as some of sort of the larger traditional, I guess, airplanes and helicopters that you would see out there.
Interesting. I mean, this idea of airspace for doing this work is a whole new wrinkle.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Corey. Corey is going to be back at the end of the evening for Q&A. So if you have questions for Corey about the drone use in their programs or drone use in general, please do put those into the chat. Now, our next speaker is Josh Kohut. Josh is a professor at Rutgers University. And tonight, Josh is going to be giving us a robot's eye view of the ocean, thanks to the autonomous vehicles that he and his team use to study ocean systems. Josh, are you ready to tell us more?
I'm ready.
All right, take it away.
Great. Thank you very much and good evening. So as said, my name is Josh Kohut, and I'm a professor of oceanography at Rutgers, the State University of New Jersey, so on the East Coast. And I'm part of the Center for Ocean Observing Leadership, where we work with a variety of ocean technologies to try and understand our ocean planet. And the technology I'm going to introduce you today is in that faded picture there. It's one of our underwater robots called a glider. So I'm going to take Corey's perspective and move below the ocean surface now. When you think about seagoing oceanographers, this might be the perspective that you think we take. This is a research vessel operated by the National Science Foundation. And this is a video that I took while crossing the Drake Passage, which is the open water area south of South America on our way to Antarctica. And this is sometimes very typical conditions that we get on the surface of the ocean. So it can be an adventure to go to sea, but these underwater robots are allowing us to access the ocean in a new way. We're able to sample the ocean with a variety of sensors in an autonomous, meaning uncrewed way. So no one is on this vehicle. You can see the size of the vehicle compared to a normal sized person in scuba gear. And it's designed to be a robot that can patrol the ocean waters for anywhere from 30 days to a full year. The way that it works, and the reason why we call it a glider, is it literally glides through the ocean. It changes its buoyancy so that it can sink and rise in the ocean. And in between those changes in buoyancy, it's literally gliding. So it'll make itself heavy and sink towards the bottom. When it gets near the bottom, it'll make itself relatively more buoyant and it'll rise to the top, collecting data all along the way and periodically coming up to the surface to let us know where it is, what data it just collected, and if we wanted to send it any additional commands. Last week, we celebrated 20 years of using these robots in the ocean. This is all the different places and ways in which we've used robots over that time, getting a lot of at-sea days while sitting at home with our families or in our classrooms on campus. Some of these missions cross ocean basins. Some of these missions are focused on particular science that's happening, whether it be in the tropics or the poles. And I'll share with you a couple of examples of how we're using this technology. The first place we're going to go is to the Antarctic. One of the benefits of using these kinds of technologies is they don't get seasick. They don't complain most of the time. So we can put them into conditions that might be more risky, like in ice-covered areas. These are the ways in which we can actually deploy the robots to collect data. The science that we're after in the Antarctic is trying to understand the ocean environment that's targeted by foragers like penguins. In the upper right is an Adelie penguin that's been tagged so we can track where it goes. The map on the left shows a red path that this particular penguin took from its colony out towards an area where it was foraging. We then send the robot in that colored line towards this area circled to see what was so special about that place. And the sensors on the robots can tell us what the ocean conditions were like in terms of temperature, salinity, how much phytoplankton was in the water at that space. This is a live map of where all the robots are right now. So as we're speaking today, this is where all the robots are located. In the East Coast region where we are, we're flying robots now to better understand habitats for marine mammals. The way that works is we send out our robot. It has a hydrophone, so we can listen for calls of whales. In this case, I'm showing in the red dots along the path the locations of right whale calls and endangered species on the East Coast. And we can use the glider to have additional sensors so we can see what the ocean's like, where those whales are and where they aren't. So we can try and understand their dynamic habitat. And so these tools are not only allowing us to measure remotely in the ocean, but they're allowing us to measure the full system so that we can understand the dynamic habitat of these animals. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Josh. The gliders are amazing to me. The idea that you would put this expensive piece of technology out there in the ocean to just have at it. Do the robots ever go where they're not supposed to, or do they ever get caught up in things like ghost nets or other barriers?
They're actually a bit more reliable than my teenage daughters, right? We expect them to call in every 2 hours, and we expect my daughter sometimes to call us, and maybe she doesn't call us when we expect. So they're actually pretty good listeners. But the ocean is a very dynamic, difficult place to sample. You mentioned it in your intro. And so there are hazards, but we use our knowledge of those hazards to try and avoid them. We can change the way the glider behaves in the ocean so we can avoid fishing areas, we can avoid shipping lanes, we can do things like that to try and minimize risk.
All right, thanks, Josh. Josh will be back at the end of the evening, so please do continue to put your questions into the chat. Thank you, Josh. Our next speaker is Deb Kelley from the University of Washington. Professor Kelley is a marine geologist who's looking at submarine volcanoes and how they support life in the absence of sunlight. Deb, are you ready to tell us more?
I am. Thanks a lot. So Josh showed some video of what it's like to be at sea and storms, and a lot of the big, most dynamic processes that happen on the planet when you're at sea. If it's a big storm, you're trying to lay in your bunk and forget that you're there. So in the National Science Foundation provided funding for the largest observatory in the world. It's an underwater observatory that's in the oceans, and it's composed of 900 kilometers of high power, high bandwidth submarine fiber optic cables. So most of our data that we access anymore, communications around the world, are on these submarine cables. But the difference with ours is that it has a lot of power. And so the map on the left there shows we have a shore station in Newport, Oregon, or in Pacific City, and we have fiber optic cables that stream out to the axial seamount, which I'll be focusing on today, but as well as other sites. So this observatory, it's going to be funded for 25 to 30 years. We address things like ocean acidification. We have instruments on the subduction zone to look at the earthquakes along there, a lot of the processes that go on our ocean. And what's nice about this is we have over 150 instruments on the sea floor and on moorings that have wire crawlers or profilers that go up and down up to 9,000 feet above the sea floor at 6 key experimental sites. Today, I wanted to focus on axial seamount. It's the largest active volcano off our coast, about 300 miles offshore and almost a mile down. What's nice about the cabled observatory, and I'll show you some examples, is that all the data flow in live to anybody in the world. So you can get on the internet. You'll be able to see video from the volcano. I'll show you that. And it's one of the reasons we chose this. It's kind of a catch-22, but the volcano is incredibly active. So it erupted in 1998, 2011, 2015, and is poised to erupt again. To get a sense of scale, if you laid out the observatory across the state of Washington, you see that it covers 3 states. So it's a very large observatory. The cables are on the sea floor, but again, we have moorings that reach up to 5 meters beneath the surface. We chose axial seamount because over 70% of the volcanism on Earth occurs underwater in systems just like the one off our coast, and they form the largest mountain chain on Earth. So there's volcanoes erupting all the time, every day, but because we're not in the right place at the right time and we don't have ways to detect them, it's very difficult to be there during eruptions. These eruptions are really important. They emit huge amounts of heat, chemicals, and actually biological material from the seafloor into the overriding ocean. But because we're not there, we don't get to see them very often when they're active. So they also have one of the most extreme environments on Earth, which are underwater hot springs shown here. At the summit of axial seamount, there's numerous hot springs, and they put out fluids at over 300 degrees centigrade, so up to 750 degrees C, and they host very interesting microbial communities. One of the cool things about our observatory is that we have this is at a hydrothermal vent, a underwater hot spring. You can sit in your living room. The video, it's a HD camera. It streams live from 300 miles offshore, 4,500 feet down, every 3 hours, and it'll stream for 14 minutes. And sometimes once a month, we'll stream it for 3 days continuously. So you're looking at this underwater hot spring. It's putting out fluids at about 700 degrees Fahrenheit. And in the background is another hot spring that's active. They're very porous. Hot fluids come out mixed with near freezing seawater, and the microorganisms there, it's a very different kinds of biological community. There's no photosynthesis down there, so they use gases that are coming off of the volcano they form the base of the food chain. So this streams in every single day. It's a really robust system. And what we're looking at is how these vent communities change over time. There's very few places in the world where we can look at vents every single day. We photomosaic, image the entire vent system every single day, every 3 hours. And in 2015, there was a big eruption. We have lots of seismometers out off the coast. And you can see all those blue dots that mark the start of the eruption, a seismic crisis. In April, in 24 hours, there were over 8,000 earthquakes. And then there was also those red dots up at the upper right corner there. Those were actually underwater explosions. We collected those with hydrophone data. And so if you want to see what one of these looks like, so this was the new lava flow. We came up on it with an ROV. We drove up the front of the face of it. When these lavas erupt on the seafloor, they put out a lot of gases. And just for a sense of scale, this lava flow was over 416 feet thick. So when you look at the top of the Space Needle there, that gives you a sense of how thick it was. And the whole top of that lava flow for acres and acres was covered in new.
Oh, curse you, lightning! I was trying to process 400 feet thick. So you don't mean long. You don't mean it was 400 feet long. You mean it was 400 feet thick.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. So it's a good sense when you stand at the bottom of the Space Needle and look up. Yeah.
The scale, this is one of the things that I love talking about the deep sea, because the scale of the ocean is almost incomprehensible, in that there are explosions. We have no idea. There are volcanic eruptions. There's 400 feet of the lava flow. And these things, if they happened on the surface, would be catastrophic disasters. And they happen all the time in the ocean. And so in your observations that you all make from the observatory, like what would comprise something that would be so significant that we would notice it on the surface? Have you seen anything like that?
Not where we work, but certainly, the same very similar types of volcanoes are off of New Zealand. Mm-hmm. And we've seen what happens when they're surface, and sometimes they're shallow enough that actually the cruise ships, now that they know how active they are, they've deviated from their normal paths because they don't really want to drive over the top of these things.
Right. That's amazing. So I've seen a lot of questions come in. I'm expecting even more are going to come in for Deb. So please do continue to add questions to the chat. Thank you, Deb. We'll see you in just a little bit. Now, our next speaker is Paul Clerkin. Paul Clerkin is a Lightning Talks veteran and a PhD student at Virginia Institute of Marine Sciences. Paul's a shark scientist who specializes in describing new species of deep sea sharks. Paul used to do that with fishing nets, but now he's got a new tool. Are you going to tell us more about that, Paul?
Yeah, ready right now.
Let's go.
Cool. Hi, everybody. My name is Paul Clerkin, and I study sharks using eDNA. So when I think of eDNA, the first thing I think of is usually forensic science. I don't know if you've ever watched the old Forensic Files show, but they're always trying to solve crimes by finding evidence of who was there on the crime scene. And they use this by using a mix of tools. A lot of the time is fingerprints, Sometimes it's physical evidence like a hair or sometimes an article of clothing. And they also use genetics. But forensic science has come a long way since then. And a lot of crimes now are solved by, they call it touch DNA. So if somebody touches something, they leave enough trace DNA behind for people to sequence and figure out who was there. So how would you be able to do that in like an environment like the ocean, where it's all water? And also, why would you be interested in doing this? It's not a crime scene. You know, what does it matter if a hammerhead was there or a tuna swam by? But this is actually a big part of what a lot of marine biologists do. A lot of us spend time trying to figure out what species are where in the ocean. This helps us understand, you know, whether invasive species are coming in, whether endangered species are there and they need help. And it helps us manage and kind of protect the species in the area. So we can do this using eDNA, which is environmental DNA, which is just DNA that marine animals, fish, sharks, whales, anything like that, that they let off into the water. The same way that if you take a bath, you know, you lose your old cells into the bath water, and fish are pretty much in the bath all the time. So they're losing cells into the environment. And then we send out these bottles. We send them down open and they automatically close. This one's going to close in just a minute. And then we take that water, see there, it closed. We take the water, we pull it back up, we pass it through a filter, and then we analyze the genetic material captured on that little filter. So we go from pretty much water to a sequence to just knowing what species were there in the area. And this has been working. We started doing that in off Virginia over here in the Atlantic. And they do these physical surveys where they go out and they put bait and hooks in the water to see what's there. They catch fish and they catch sharks. They let them go afterwards. But the long line, the physical survey gets these species, and you can see from the eDNA in this purple circle that we get almost all the same species that they caught in the long line, plus some that they didn't see. One interesting thing is some of these species that we only see in the eDNA have small mouths. They're small animals, and they're so small that I don't think they can get the hook in their mouth. So I think they're there. They're just not seen during the physical survey. This figure over here shows the animals that we saw, the sharks from the physical survey, and when there's in the water. And this eDNA sample shows all the sharks that we detected with the eDNA after the bait was in the water. There's more than in the water. This is eDNA with before any bait went in the water. And even though there's more after the bait, there's still a lot in the pre-bait, and even more than the long line. So this figure right here shows sharks that we were detected when we took a sample at depth versus at the surface. And we saw the most at depth, but we saw a lot at the surface. So even more than we saw with the physical long line. So eDNA seems to be a very good way for detecting shark species. It can detect them better than the physical surveys. There's less gear selectivity or bias. It's also easier to collect water samples in kind of structurally complicated areas that might be hard to sample with a net or a long line. It's also much easier on the shark's health. As you can imagine, catching them on the long line, even though we release them alive, it can stress them out, and it's much easier to collect a water sample and just process that. It's still very much a developing technology, though. We are still figuring out how much eDNA, how much DNA animals put into the water, how quickly it's taken out of the environment. What does a detection event mean? We're figuring out ways to try to get relative abundance. How many of a certain animal are detected in an area based off of eDNA? And we are trying to make it cheaper and easier to use. Me and some of my colleagues are teaming up with our partners at Creality to make 3D printable eDNA samplers that you can print out and you can deploy, collect water samples and filter them. And this would make it available to citizen scientists, making it much easier to do eDNA samples. We're also starting to probe into the deep sea. While there are some groups right now that are collecting water samples with gliders, like those autonomous vehicles, there are groups that are envisioning one day being able to send out these robots that will sequence and transmit those sequences to a researcher. That's my talk. At time. Thanks for listening, and thanks for everybody that contributed resources and time to making this project happen. And I look forward to your questions in a little bit.
That was real close, Paul. Real close.
I know. Yeah.
So the eDNA is fascinating to me. I just the idea that you're basically seeing a record of what the animals that used to be there. But one of your specialties is describing new species. So when you're looking at a piece of DNA, how do you know that you're not looking at a piece of damaged DNA versus something that's never been seen before?
Yeah. So the eDNA, when you collect it and you amplify it, the bit that you're looking at is much shorter than if you're amplifying like a longer sequence. And so I guess it could be a damaged part. You're looking at a part of the DNA that we can match up with a barcode that you already have from another shark, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
So we do expect, especially once we start probing into the deep sea, that we're going to get DNA from animals that that are just new species and we don't know what they are. And I think all we can do right then is like give them a placeholder. Like there seems to be a new species there. Put it in the tree as like a SPA.
Yeah. So like we don't know what this is. We think it might be something new, but we can't say for sure. That kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Paul. If you all have questions for Paul, and I know that eDNA generates tons of questions, so I'm excited to see what folks would like to know more about. Paul's going to be back in just a little bit. But right now it's my time to introduce our final speaker, another Lightning Talks veteran from MBARI, the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute. Kakani Katija is here to share about a new online game that you can play to help train software to better recognize deep sea creatures. Kakani, are you ready to bring us home?
Yeah, thank you.
All right, take it away.
All right. I'm excited to share with you all a very big effort that's being undertaken by a lot of different people, and there's a really good reason why. Any guesses on what planet this is? This is what planet Earth, our home, looks like when you center the globe on the Pacific Ocean. And images like these make you question why we call our planet Earth rather than planet Ocean. And this is especially true when you see the statistics. About 71% of the Earth's surface area is ocean. But because the ocean is a massive volume, where its deepest depths are 11 kilometers or nearly 7 miles deep, it represents about 99% of the habitable volume on the planet. Unfortunately, though, it is still one of the least explored places, where human eyes or cameras have seen less than 1% of it. And because of that lack of exploration, scientists estimate that 30 to 60% of life in the ocean is unknown to science. We need to fill that gap. And scientists, researchers, marine biologists, scuba divers, and enthusiasts all over the world are deploying systems to explore the depths of the ocean. They're using robots, both autonomous and remote, floats, drop cameras, drones, and even diver-held systems to collect imagery of life in the ocean. This data is incredibly rich with information, and we have to turn pixels into actionable data to identify and quantify life in the ocean. We're using artificial intelligence to rapidly process this, but we can't keep up. We need to train and verify and improve the artificial intelligence we use as we fill these observational gaps. And we can't do it alone. We need your help. So we're creating a video game, and it's called Fathomverse, where you can explore the final frontier on our planet with us. Fathomverse is a free downloadable app on the Apple and Google Play app stores, and it's designed to inspire a new wave of ocean explorers from high school and up. Fathomverse combines immersive gameplay with cutting-edge science. And as players interact with real ocean imagery collected by researchers, they learn about ocean animals. In turn, the players are teaching artificial intelligence models to identify ocean life. The mobile game features innovative gameplay and rich graphics that engage ocean enthusiasts, animal lovers, and armchair explorers alike. And I'm here to give you a quick sneak peek. So Fathomverse is currently in beta, and if you go to the link on the left or use the QR code, you can become a beta tester. When you open up the game, you have the option to look at different animal groups. This one is for octopuses, and you'll learn the different features that can be used to distinguish them, see images of animals that make up that group, but also images of animals that might confuse you. And once you select your animal missions, you can then enter a dive. And it's this place where you interact with real life data. So data collected by researchers all over the world as we're trying to explore the ocean. And what you're seeing is the game player is actually tapping their screen, sending out a pulse and revealing the animals in the dive. And then you have the option to collect or log the animals that you see, especially if they match your animal missions. And then the other thing that you can do, right, is this is an exploration game. You can switch currents and dive through this immersive environment, revealing all of the animals, anywhere from 25 to 50 of them along the way. And once you've revealed all the animals and collected the ones that correspond to your mission, you then receive contribution points, which is what you see here. And then you'll finally enter an activity where you identify all of the animals that you collected. Now, this step is very important because you're either correcting or verifying what the artificial intelligence thinks it has seen. And so far, we've had 3,000 beta testers sign up with more than 1,000 people playing the game. And in 2 months, beta testers have generated more than 430,000 annotations. And we'd like to hear from you, so use the QR code to sign up. And so while the game is currently in beta, the first full version of the game is expected to be released early next year. So we can't wait to see what's in store for Fathomverse and hope you join our mission to explore and discover life in our ocean. Onwards and downwards.
I love onwards and downwards. I feel like I'm going to say that again in the future.
Feel free to use.
This, you know, you and I have talked about this. Like, there's a obvious like parallel between the game and its sort of approach and like Pokemon Go and other kinds of collectors games. Was that in the forefront of y'all's mind when you were developing the game?
That's definitely a big part. You know, I think there's estimates that say there's more than 2 billion people in the world that play video games. And, you know, why not use that time to also help us achieve this huge, huge mission of, you know, trying to explore the entire ocean and try to identify all the life in it. And so it just seemed like a perfect approach and fit. And I'm nervous, right? We haven't officially launched the game yet, but, you know, if you're interested, you feel free to sign up and we'll send you updates when it does officially release.
Yeah, the beta results so far sound pretty good.
Yeah. And we're learning a lot. We're learning a lot. So we're just grateful that people have, you know, the game has resonated with people and they've signed up and really helped us get to this point.
Well, that's fantastic. Now, Kakani's not going to go anywhere. Please do, however, keep adding questions to the chat. So we're bringing all of our speakers back to the screen now for our Q&A session. Now, this is your opportunity to ask questions of all of these scientists about their work and about the deep sea, the use of ocean-based technology for science and conservation. And, you know, I've seen tons of good questions come in, and as we're sort of organizing and figuring them out, I'm just curious, do any of you all have questions for each other?
I kind of want to ask Corey how you got into using the drones. I feel like I have a drone and I always mean to use it more. Did you have experience before this, or you just decided you wanted to use it and like trained yourself? How did it start?
It started a bit. Years and years ago, we started using digital cameras in the early days of digital cameras for some of this work with riggings to try to get some of this data. We had thought about using toy helicopters, but they didn't work. When the first drones came out, they weren't quite ready. So we'd always had this idea for mobile platform. And then when the drones really became a thing about 7-8 years ago, we started investing in them and then transferring the techniques we had used with the old digital cameras to the drones now. So that gave us a pretty quick way to get up and running with our drone program.
Very cool.
Corey, have you found that has it gotten easier to find drone pilots? Like I said, we were just in Bali doing this filming. I mean, everywhere we stopped, somebody else had a drone in the air. It seems like the use of drones just recreationally has skyrocketed.
Yeah, you do see that, but I think one of the things where we tend to work at, there tend to be a lot of regulations about the drones. So we usually have to put in a lot of paperwork before we put a drone in the air. So it's not that common that we see it. But yeah, there are places, on the coastline where you will see, a lot of active recreational drone pilots out there. But in terms of some of the places we do research at, it's a little less common to see as many drones in the air.
So, Josh, I got a question about that came in about the West Coast universities and the gliders that they use, because we've actually in other previous lightning talks a few years back have talked with Fritz Starr and others who have used the gliders here on the West Coast. How much do universities and research groups that are using gliders communicate or cooperate with each other?
I think that's one of the best parts of my job is the collaboration with groups all around the world. And UW or U-Washington, right, is one of the pioneers in developing glider technology. There's a glider called the Sea Glider that was conceived at U-Washington, right? And so the Pacific Northwest has been a leader in using these types of vehicles, as other parts around the world, in Europe, Australia. And so that global community gets together and collaborates. We even have like group therapy sessions for glider pilots, right? Like, oh, how do you deal with this when every time a glider aborts, it's always like 3 a.m. on a Friday night or something like that, right? And how do you handle it? And so yeah, it's the best part of being in the glider community is the community itself. And there's a lot of really smart people, and there's a ton of collaboration that happens across the whole community.
Have you all lost a glider?
I don't like to use the word lost, but we have some that are doing very long-term deployments in the ocean that we haven't recovered yet. But yeah, so we've, in all seriousness, we've deployed, our own lab group has deployed well over almost 600 now glider missions over the last 20 years. And we've had 8 of those nearly 600 missions end in a loss. So in terms of how difficult it is to put things in the ocean and get them back, they do a pretty good job of coming home.
Yeah, I can see a future circumstance where someone runs across a glider that was launched like 700 years ago and it's been going the whole time. It's like a time capsule. I feel like there's like a
time series that would be, right?
So Deb, there's been quite a upswing in interest about that octopus that you conveniently didn't mention while talking about the hydrogen. We're talking hundreds of degrees, not just hundreds of degrees, which you can sort of see that wavering water, and it looks like it's hot, and it's like, how does it survive? But not just that, but the water is incredibly toxic there for surface animals, right? Full of chemicals and metals and everything else. Like, how do those ecosystems support such a rich community?
Sure. Yeah, sorry about that. So yeah, the octopuses they're one of the larger, we see big rays, and octopus are the main 2 large animals, rat-tailed fish. So those vents, you can think of them as a big sponge. So they do put out incredibly hot fluids. Axial seamount, they're actually boiling at 700 and some degrees. But the seawater, as the fluids go out through the spongy walls, porous walls, they mix with the cold, near freezing seawater there. That's the first time that I've worked in vents for 30, 40 years. That's the first time I've ever seen an octopus crawling around on an active one like that. All that biology that you saw was, we see a lot of tube worms, limpets, and they have a fine habitat there, but there are little pockets that are putting out really hot water. So one of the things I was amazed at was when we saw this and that one chimney right in front that's venting very strongly it's about 700 degrees Fahrenheit. And so I don't know why they don't burn their toes, but they must have some way to sense it. I don't know. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's an amazingly diverse habitat down there, right? It's functioning on chemicals, not on sunlight, and the conditions are so different. It might as well be another planet.
Yeah, a lot of the organisms, because it is because the fluids do have so many metals in them, it is it has a lot of hydrogen sulfide. A lot of things that would kill us, the organisms, especially the microbes, live on fine. But they do have super high, even clams have super high metal tolerances. So they've just developed their metabolisms to adjust to that environment.
Paul, so the eDNA idea is really cool, but it also is really confusing. Like, so there's basically little bits of animals left behind. How do you tell the difference between an animal's little bits and something that animal ate, or doesn't matter?
Yeah, there's a lot of, it's a powerful tool. There's a lot of stuff we're still figuring out. So when we detect an animal through eDNA, it doesn't tell us anything about the condition of the animal. It could be, an animal there. It could be mature. It could be young. It could also be dead. So an animal that has, if it's an animal that's bleeding or dead, it doesn't tell us anything about that. I also know people that study eDNA through like fecal material, so through poop, and they can see what animals are eating through that. So it's just detecting the animal through the DNA. We don't really know that what that means. It could be coming in from a current from further away. It can be there's also currents washing things out. eDNA is broken down by microbes, UV, temperature. People are studying it. They're doing papers on studying areas and different species and different times to see, and they do temperature experiments to see it break down. And it's useful. I think part of the solution is going to be us just kind of doing enough eDNA surveys for it to be like a standard. Like when we do a long line, we don't know how far the bait traveled and what that, exactly how many animals came to the long line, what that represents. It's almost the same, as that for eDNA. With us know, that we're detecting this many species, and maybe even relative abundance would be a relative thing until we can figure it out anymore.
It's really on the front end of this technology, right? Like it's clearly useful, and there seems like there's lots of questions still to answer.
Yeah, it's very exciting. It's been working great for us, but there's just so much unknown. It's only it was used for microbes, originally, and then was used for bullfrogs to detect invasive bullfrogs in the lake in 2008. And since then, it's been developing quickly, but it's still just kind of probing, marine environments, the open ocean, and just making its way into deep sea stuff.
Yeah, Kakani, with this game, you say you're in the beta, you're about to launch. What does success look like?
Oh, that's such a good question. We've been trying to come up with a number of different metrics. They could be based on number of game players. It could be based on how long are game players playing, how many times do they come back to the game. But also those are kind of like unusual metrics you might use for a game. But the other thing that we have is the scientific data that the game players are also generating. And like I think I mentioned, during our beta tests, we're already getting more than 430,000 annotations in that period of time from game players. And so it'd be really interesting to see how many game players we get, but also how much data we're able to achieve. And I think it's going to be, for me personally, I think being able to create some sort of outlet or way that people can contribute directly to, an action around ocean exploration discovery is going to be, I think, personally, I'm very excited about that.
How much checking are you doing on, do you know what I'm saying? Like the categories are pretty simple. It's like it's a worm, it's a crab. You're not asking for like species of crab necessarily.
Yeah.
And people make mistakes, people goof around on a game, right? Like how much checking do you do of their work?
So this is what's, I think, really cool about this whole program that we're building. So the game is one aspect of this program called Ocean Vision AI. There's another aspect of it called FathomNet. And so FathomNet is this massive database with imagery that have been labeled by experts. And so what we're doing in the game is we're sprinkling that expert labeled data into the game. And we're then comparing how well the game players are playing against that data, along with, right, the new labels that they're generating. And so it's that way we can, evaluate how well game players are playing, give them scores for accuracy, precision, recall, and then be able to determine, right, how many, depending on game player success or quality, how many of those individuals need to agree with each other so that we will get an accurate label. So there's a lot that we're borrowing from, the artificial intelligence community, right? And applying it to a game with gamification elements. I mean, I'm cautiously optimistic, but I really hope people download the game and participate, and also let us know what they'd like to see or what they would want us to change.
So all of these techniques are doing more with less effort, right? So like a game that requires fewer scientists to identify deals, like eDNA is, you don't have to go out in long line for sharks. Corey, you said y'all are doing like surveys in 10 minutes that used to take you hours. Like, these are good things. And, people always freak out about how things get automated, right? Do you need fewer scientists because your technology is more powerful? Like, how do you all process sort of that nexus between the capabilities that are provided to you by all these new technologies and some of the older technologies? There's still people who romanticize the idea of being a marine biologist because they want to scuba dive all of the time, right? Anybody want to talk to that? Because it's always that conversation with technology in general.
We get that question a lot, Jim, and the way that I think about it is that we have a lot of new tools in our toolbox to understand this fascinating ocean planet that we live on, right? And it's really hard to do that. And so tools like the gliders that we're using, allow me to have dinner with my family and still be able to sample the ocean with 5 gliders that we have right now, right? And so it's awesome to go to sea, and I love going to sea, but being at sea for 2 months at a time can be sometimes pressure and at home. And the other thing too is, by having tools like this, it really expands who can be oceanographers, because not everyone can dedicate that amount of time to go to sea, but everyone can utilize these public data sets that are coming back and be armchair oceanographers, which we need more of. And Kakani's example is a great example of that, where these kinds of technologies really open up opportunities for more people to participate in ocean science so we can understand what's going on. But they do not replace the technologies that you might typically think of, but allow us maybe to be a little bit more strategic with the use of vessels and other things that require more effort.
Yeah, and if I could add on to a little bit of what Josh was saying, some of my experience with, the drones, about opening up opportunities. We sometimes depict, being a marine scientist, I kind of joke this Indiana Jones character, and you're jumping off the boat and this type of thing. Not everyone's able to do that. I've worked with, individuals with disabilities, and, the drones give them a different, avenue to enter the marine sciences. And when you do that, when you open up opportunities to new audiences, you're also bringing in new perspectives, new talents, that the solutions to the really tricky questions you've been trying to answer for decades might be in this population that historically you haven't engaged for one reason or another. And I think, that's the other, advantage of these types of new technologies, that it opens up new possibilities and new avenues, for new scientific talent.
I love that feedback, because that's one of the things when people ask, like, well, what does it take to be a marine biologist? And my response is always like, well, I don't know what kind of marine biologist do you mean? Because like it's not a like a monolithic kind of thing. There are so many different kinds of marine biologists, and now with these sort of technological pieces, you're opening it even further, which is needed desperately.
I think one of the greatest transitions that's taken place since I started, going to sea was, with the cable array, all the data are public, and they're at, we take, almost all instruments take at least one measurement a second. And so anybody in the world can, it used to be we would publish our pairs, right? You have to work on your own data set and you'd guard that really closely. And
right.
Now it's just the opposite. And I think that's great with this new technology, that so many more people that would never ever, have access to those data or be able to and look at with new eyes. I think is a really great thing to happen. So.
I love the accessibility that a lot of these technologies provide for the ocean, because I think the stat is like 2% of the American population are scuba certified, which means 98% have really never explored the ocean in that kind of way. And yet there are cameras at the bottom of the ocean and cabled observatories in Monterey Bay and in the Pacific Northwest. You've got organizations like Schmidt and Ballard's group and NOAA who are doing, sort of real-time broadcasts of deep sea missions going to places that no human being has ever laid eyes on. And that's available and free and in high definition. And the game is another thing. It just sort of opens the ocean in a way that it's never been available to people before. Well, let's see. There's a couple of other questions in here, and I want to kind of poke at. Josh, there's a lot of curiosity about, I just think people, maybe they don't trust those robots. How do you make sure they're not running into things, that they're not getting into trouble, causing problems? We haven't even talked about AI and robots and all of that. But so you say you don't lose that many, which is great. But how do they manage, obstacles? Like someone asked about submarines. I think the ocean is so big that I think the idea of a glider running into a submarine might be pretty small, but how do they manage otherwise?
Yeah, good question. So, there is a great team of, we call them pilots. These are our glider technicians that are managing the missions. But when the gliders are submerged, they're on their own. They have their own logic. They have a compass. They have pressure sensors to figure out how deep they are in the ocean, all those types of things. And we give them some commands to say, oh, go over this way or go over that way, or maybe don't dive so deep here because there's pinnacles or something that we want to avoid, or don't come so close to the surface here because there's a lot of vessels in the area. And it's only when they come to the surface that we communicate with them, and we can kind of track how they're doing and give them some updated commands. And so I think it's with experience. We know how to operate these in different areas, and we can configure them. And they're very good listeners, like I mentioned earlier. And so we've found ways to try and minimize those risks. But all the questions that are coming in on this topic are accurate. These are all risks that we consider and we try and minimize as we design a mission plan for the glider.
Yeah, Josh, you better hope your daughter's not listening to this broadcast.
She doesn't listen to me anymore. I have no worry of that. Yeah.
So we've been talking about a lot of really cool technology, some really kind of bleeding edge stuff. But what's next? What didn't we talk about tonight? What's the next kind of frontier of really cool ocean tech that's on the horizon?
I have one good example. So there's a new system coming out on telecommunication cables that cross the entire ocean. And it basically turns every meter to 10 meters, so every 3 feet to 30 feet into an individual sensor. So when you think of 3,000 miles of cable or whatever, that's a ton of measurements, and they can detect. We did a short experiment in 4 days off the coast, just for 4 days, and there were over 10,000 whale calls that were measured. So that's to me, it's like the first telescope in the oceans, and I've been here a long time, and it's one of the most exciting things I've ever heard. So they're using it. It's called DAS, or distributed acoustic sensing. They use them for glaciers now and on land too. So, but to me, it will be. I don't like the word transformational because people use it a lot, but this I think really will be so.
I love that the three-dimensional nature of the ocean is something I don't think people appreciate, because I think we think of ourselves as living in two-dimensional space, even though of course we don't. But but just that three-dimensional soundscape, just like you're talking about, and how it's influenced by sound moving through the water. Not only is it running into things like animals and geography, but also density, like water density, temperature changes, and it's moving and changing and turning. It's just it's a really sophisticated space.
Yeah, I think in the area that I'm working in, the exciting thing is how we can now start to try and understand the ocean the way the organisms in the ocean understand that environment, and these tools are allowing us to see the ocean at that kind of frame, and that will help us as a society make smarter decisions, I hope, in how we interact with the ocean and the organisms within it, right? It's an incredibly dynamic place, and when we think about things like offshore wind or shipping or some of these other human uses, how do we account for the fact that the ocean moves? You know, if you're planning to build a library in a town, imagine if you had to plan for that when the roads and the sidewalks move, how difficult that would be, right? And so these tools, I think, are allowing us to get those decision aids to make smarter decisions, we hope, that accounts for that dynamic ocean.
I love the idea of learning about the ocean from an animal's perspective, because we Aquarium, we talk about empathy a lot here at the Seattle Aquarium, and hope that we always want people to think about, like, not what is it like for you to swim in an animal's fins or whatever, but what is it like for the animal to swim in their own fins? Like, what's it like to be a seal? Not what's it like for you to be a seal. What's it like to be a seal? And so I love that idea of using technology for us to better understand an animal's life in the ocean. Any other outliers or cool things on the horizon?
I think for me, I was going to think the drone in the box concept, which is a dream I always had, where right now we have to hike out to our sites with the drones, or we have to be on a boat. And, I'd always had this idea that you could actually have like a stations of drones that'll go back to a box, recharge, and upload the data. And that's starting to come down the pipeline. Like one company has a little small variation on that right now, where you can just leave the drone there, and it's almost totally autonomous, where you don't have to have an operator that'll take off at a set time of day, come back, recharge, and send the data, back to you.
Nice. And Josh, are you collecting water samples for folks who are doing eDNA work with gliders?
Oh, that's a dream. So Paul's method. So there's a lot of effort, as Paul mentioned, in trying to figure out how to get more samples for eDNA analysis, and the robots are out there. And so there are companies and researchers that are looking at how we can get samplers. On a glider, it's a challenge because it's so dependent on buoyancy, and you can't really add water samples, but are there ways to filter water and then preserve that filter, right, where you're not adding a lot of mass to the glider with each sample? So yes, that's an exciting forefront, I think, is thinking about how we integrate some of those eDNA samplers, not just collecting the samples, but is there even a way in the future to do the analysis and you could actually return the result, right, in real time from a platform like a glider? That would be really cool. And it's a little far off, but I assume soon.
Yeah, that all of that. Mind-blowing, right? All these things are so incredible, and the ocean is such a fertile place for inspiring innovation because it's so harsh, right? Because it forces you to think of new solutions, because the old stuff doesn't work as well as we need it to. Kakani, I want to give you the last word. So we saw where we can participate, but how can we help promote the use of the game?
Share it with all your friends and family. To start, if you know someone famous, put them in touch with me too. Just putting out feelers. If anyone knows Jason Momoa, I think he'd be a great person to help advocate for the game. But I think it's going to be word of mouth, really. And I think also the aquariums, right? The aquariums around the world are such a great mouthpiece for the ocean. So it'd be great to get that help.
And people are we've got a promotion right now that we're running with Nintendo and Animal Crossing, and that people are just wild about. And I can see that same kind of connection that people may want to not only do something like Animal Crossing and have fun and blow off steam, but also contribute to the conservation and understanding of the ocean. Be amazing.
Yeah, fingers crossed, everybody.
Fingers crossed. All right, well, that's all the time we have for this evening. Thanks again to our speakers, all amazing as usual. So if you all could, all of our listeners, that is, use the technology that's available to you and maybe drop some applause emoji in the chat or show them some love. We really appreciate their contributions to this evening. Now, if you enjoyed tonight's Lightning Talks, Lightning Talk is a free science event. So if you'd like to, please do consider a donation. Those donations help keep programs like Lightning Talks free and accessible for all. Now, our next Lightning Talk event is February 22nd. We will be excited to explore the world of octopuses and squid and cuttlefish, also known as cephalopods. So maybe that deep sea vent octopus will get a return engagement with Lightning Talks. You can see all of our past Lightning Talks events on our YouTube channel, so please check them out. And of course, don't forget to click like and subscribe. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.